thank you guys for coming out and joining us on this gorgeous evening. We hear from Evie Hawtrey and Eliza Knight. And tonight they're going to share from their books which share some common things. They're both set in London, feature strong and clever women, bookshops, and stories past and present. Evie's book, End by Fire, came out last Tuesday and features two extraordinary female detectives who track a pair of murderous geniuses who will burn the world for their art. And as part of their investigation, they end up looking into the case of a bookseller who went missing during the Great Fire, I think 350 years prior. Eliza's book, The Mayfair Bookshop, a novel of Nancy Mitford in the Pursuit of Happiness, I love that title, came out last month. The Mayfair Bookshop is a dual narrative story which goes back and forth between the story of Nancy Mitford, one of the 1930s London's hottest socialite, which is very hard to say, easy to read, hard to say. She was also an author and a member of the scandalous Mitford sisters. And then, and the other part of the story is told by a modern American desperate for change who goes to London to work in a small bookshop, and no surprise to us, their lives both of their lives are changed by the bookshop. You know, bookshops do change lives. That is a Yank by birth, but a sister in spirit to her fierce and feminist London detective, D.I. Nigella Barker. And she splits her time between D.C., where she lives with her husband, and New York, where she enjoys history, lingering over teas, and knocking about in pubs. And I hear she told me that people over there are missing her, wondering when she's going to come back. And Eliza's an award-winning USA Today bestselling author. Her love of history began as a young girl when she traipsed the halls of Versailles, which I hope you're going to talk a little bit about that, because that's very intriguing. She's a member of the Historical Novel Society and Novelist Inc., and the creator of the popular historical blog History Undressed. Please join me in welcoming Eliza Knight.
And if you all are comfortable, you're welcome. The authors are welcome to remove their masks.
We're going to do that. Then you can see our beautiful faces.
People can hear you better too.
I'm going to start this off by saying that I've known Eliza for, well, we could say decades, but we're going to say years. And I know that, like me, you've been drawn to a variety of time periods and a variety of locations, from ancient Pompeii, which we've done together, to the Tudor court. So what drew you to World War II, and specifically to this tale of one of the bright young things, one of the Mitford sisters?
Well, as you know, I love scandal, and the Mitfords are full of scandal. And when I was thinking about writing a novel, I like to write biographical fiction, historical fiction, and we've done a couple of projects together. We can talk about those later on in the chat here. But I was looking for a character who was interesting, had a tumultuous background, was vibrant and intelligent, but wasn't your typical person that you might think about when you think about World War II. And so I had long been a fan of the Mitford family and Nancy Mitford's work, and I thought, well, that's kind of daunting. I don't know if I want to take that on, but I just decided to take the leap, and that was like the end of that. And her world is completely crazy. I mean, first of all, she is a socialite with, but not your average socialite. So she was considered poor amongst her peers. And when I say that, I know I told you during the writing of this story, there's an interview with one of her sisters that, well, poor is really relative. We still had massive castles and servants and all that, but we couldn't buy our dresses designer. So, you know, they were suffering. They were suffering in their massive castles, and they couldn't go to boarding school. So, you know, they suffered through their childhood reading in this massive, extensive library that they had, which sounds great to me. But yeah, so I was just really drawn actually to the family and the dynamics between the sisters. I mean, they run from Nancy, who's a socialist author, to two sisters who were fascists. One was in love with Hitler and rumored to be his mistress, all the way down to one who's a communist, and then another one who becomes a duchess. They're just all over the place. And in the midst of that, with World War II going on, Nancy isn't just being an author, she's also volunteering. She is working in a morgue, writing people's names on their forehead who come into the place after being bombed. I mean, it's just crazy. But I want to talk about your book now.
Do you? Oh,
Well, I love your book.
how convenient.
So, I think this is a question that everyone pretty much has for you, which is, what made you decide to jump from historical fiction straight into writing a dual timeline crime novel with a dose of history inside?
Insanity, but beyond insanity, I spent a decade, and for those in the audience who don't know me, I spent a decade writing straight historical novels under the name of Sophie Perrineau. So people are like, "You're Sophie Perrineau?" And then I had an idea. I keep a lot of folders. I'm sure you keep a lot of folders too. You hear something, you think, I'm going to put this in a folder, and someday it's. So I was somewhere waiting for a child, which is to your adult life, you're waiting for. And there was someone on NPR talking about the Great Fire of London. How everybody knows the Great Fire of London's accidental. That's not debatable, which I agree with, and I'm not challenging that in my book. And then she said, but you know, it's always been interesting to me. Nobody benefited from the Great Fire of London more than Christopher Wren, because he got to rebuild everything. And I was interested in the fact that he was already sitting for 2 years on a commission to restore Old St. Paul's. And Old St. Paul's, the Roundheads, the Puritans, had pretty much devastated it. They stabled horses in it. They used the baptismal font for unspeakable things. And Christopher Wren had been to the continent, and he felt that London didn't need a patched-up job. London needed a brand new cathedral with a dome. But Christopher Wren wasn't a famous architect then. He was a professor at Oxford, and he had his first commission, which was at Oxford itself, and he was an astronomy professor. And he was on this commission with somebody who was the most popular architect at the time, and he discovered, which many of us do in life, that that didn't mean he was a good architect. It meant a lot of people had paid him to design buildings, so everyone had to praise him. So I had this idea that I thought I'll write a straight historical novel about, because the underlying theme of the book is, what will we do for art, and what is it acceptable to do for art? And obviously self-sacrifice is acceptable, but probably killing people's not. I say probably, because now that I write crime, I'm not entirely certain about that. So, but then the modern storyline just came to me. I thought, isn't that unusual? And I thought it would be a challenge to link the two and to discover, could 350-year-old crimes help solve modern crimes? But also, you write historical fiction, so you know this. When you write historical fiction, you really, not only do you research, you really have to stick very close to because someone's going to email you, even if you get it right. They're going to say, that button was wrong. It was so liberating to write a modern timeline because you have to make stuff up.
Yeah.
And I have a very good friend who's British, and I said, well, I know the name of the police commissioner for the City of London Police, and I'm going to use it. She said, so you want to get sued? She said, you can't use the names of really living people. So I just decided, if you're going to take a leap of faith in life, you should have faith in yourself. So I thought, I'm going to leap, and if the parachute opens, great, and if it doesn't, I'll be splat. I won't know anyway. So we're only a week out, so we're going to see if the chute opens.
But I'm really glad you did take that leap, because honestly, your voice, your crime voice, like your modern crime voice, is extraordinary, and I really, really love it.
I think so.
It's really good.
One of the things I noticed in your book, and that I love about your characters always, but it's very true here, is Nancy's fully human. She's not a cardboard cutout, and she is so talented. She's a talented writer. But she does what a lot of us do. She puts obstacles in her own way, and that's why I thought your subtitle, "And the Pursuit of Happiness," was perfect. Can you talk to me a little bit, or talk to us a little bit about why she makes the decisions she makes, and why you think she's her own worst stumbling block sometimes?
Sure. So I think that for most of her life, she was very insecure, I think. She often talks about how she wanted to be an only child, and her sister Pam, who was born when she was 3, sort of ruined her life, and then obviously the subsequent siblings. But because of that, and maybe even her relationship with her mom, which was kind of tumultuous, her mom's a little bit of a bitter woman herself, I think that made her sort of create a shell. And so she was often seen as kind of like nasty or critical. She famously nicknamed 3 of her sisters Nit, Sick, and Bore, and she had taken it from the middle parts of their name, Unity, Jessica, and Deborah. She literally just took the middle part out, and that's what they were called for a while. She would famously like tease her sisters, like dress up like criminal or something and then sneak onto their property and try to scare them, and they would, you know, run dying. And at one point, but she, I mean, through all that, she actually really did love her sisters. But at one point, she said something like, sisters are like protection against like life's adversity, and then or cruel adversity. And then one of the younger ones said, actually, sisters are life's cruel adversity. You're crazy. So anyways, like she has this shell that she's put around herself, I think, and it's how she reacts to people. It's sort of like just the fake version of herself. And like doing research on her, I wondered, like, why would she act that way? So that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to explore her personality as well, was because I feel like people who are kind of nasty or cynical or come off a little bit bitter or always sort of like have that biting remark, and there's something else going on inside them, and so I really just wanted to explore that with her.
There's pain.
There's pain somewhere.
There's pain
Yeah.
somewhere. I think you show that to us very, very
Right.
cogently in this book.
And she makes a lot of decisions that, you know, as her best friend, if I were there in the real life, I would have been like, girl, leave that guy. What are you doing? Or like, actually don't say yes to marrying him. You're the third woman he's asked tonight, and he's wasted. So why would you do that? But she didn't have those kinds of relationships, I think, just because she was always sort of putting a wall up in front of her. But speaking of walls,
Nigella's the woman of the
yes,
wall.
Nigella Parker has a lot of walls and trouble making relationships herself.
She does.
So-
And I think it comes from a different place. I think Nigella represents, and maybe Nigella channels a lot of things about me. Like Nigella has a fear of fire, and if anyone reads the book, you're going to read the story from Nigella's childhood where you find out why she's afraid of fire, and I gave her that. That's from my childhood. I can still see the news coverage. It's not a house in Britain. I can still see the house that looks normal from the outside and it's gutted from the inside. So, but I think women know that we have to work 200% to be perceived as competent as a man is working 50% most of the time. And Nigella is from a very blue blood family. She's Oxbridge educated, and her family was not thrilled that she didn't become a professor or become an attorney, that she chose to become a policewoman. And she, let's face it, it's not the time of Jane Tennyson, it's not the 60s, but there's still quite a bit of sexism in the police force too. Handsy people who, so she's made up her mind that she is going to be the best of the best and achieve what she wants to achieve professionally, and that means she doesn't have time. She's very relationship focused. She doesn't have time to connect with people in relationships. So we open the book with she's got a very attractive boy toy that she picked up at an art show, and but she's paired in this case with someone who she did let get close to her, and he's an officer from Metropolitan Police, and she's a city police of London. And as it says on the book jacket, so I'm not giving anything away, they were lovers until he uttered 3 ill-fated little words, and we all know what those are. I love you, right? And she put his stuff in a box and she sent him away. So now they're working together on this case, and I think she has to learn that because it's obvious from the beginning to the reader that he's not fungible, that she has to be willing to make herself vulnerable to people, and I think everybody has that lesson
Right.
one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I think
Even
that's
Nancy, I think.
right. That's right. That's right. Now both of our books have some mystery in them. Mine is technically a mystery and crime novel, but there's definitely a mystery going on here, specifically involving your modern timeline. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So in the modern timeline, my heroine is coming from the DC area where she works for a book curator company to go do a project in London. She's up for promotion, and if she does this project very well, then she's going to have it in the bag. But personally, for her, she's sort of on a quest that her and her mother had been on themselves before her mother passed away, which was her mother had visited this bookshop in London many, many decades before, found The Pursuit of Love, which is a book that Nancy wrote on the shelf, and had an inscription in it to one of Nancy's friends. But throughout all of the reading of their letters, which are published, all Nancy's hundreds of letters published between friends and sisters, they never located the name of who this mystery friend might be. And so it was
We
sort
should
of,
say her name is Iris.
yes, her name is Iris. Well, I named her after my grandmother. She's actually a fake person. But not my grandmother.
Yeah. We won't tell her you said that.
So she, it was kind of a game they played. They read the book together often, and then they would read through different things trying to see if they could figure out who this person was. But they never solved it before her mother passed away. So she's thinking, well, if I'm actually going to this bookshop, I might actually be able to dig up who this person was, because that was something they'd never been able to do, was actually go to London. So she's on this personal quest as well as a career quest. And when she gets there, she's got a packet of letters that her mother left behind that they had never read. It was in a lockbox. So every night she's opening a letter and reading it. And at the beginning of the chapters are these different letters, which I always have to do like a little caveat, like Nancy did have hundreds of thousands of letters written, published. The ones in this book are all ones that I wrote. But, so just so you know, they're fictional, but they do sound a lot like her, because I didn't really get into her head. So anyways, the mystery is trying to find who this Irish person is. And she comes up across a number of potential people who don't sort of pan out. And then at the end, perhaps there's a solution, but I don't want to give it away.
No, don't give it away. Don't solve the mystery.
I'm not solving the mystery for you.
That's one thing I learned writing mysteries.
Yes.
You can't solve a mystery. So, yeah, and I have obviously two mysteries. The first is a murderous arsonist in modern London who is making sculptures that use burnt flesh as well as burnt wood, so that's pretty creepy. And the second is a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine Braganza, who was Charles II's queen. She has a kind of forbidden, she's a woman of science. She has a heart defect. She couldn't come to court till she was older, and she's got a kind of forbidden romance going with the son of the royal fireworks maker, who's also a big fan of, very Enlightenment thinker. And they have a friend who's a bookseller, and he goes missing during the Great Fire. And his wife is also a friend, and she asks them to find him. And so they go looking for that, but unfortunately, they find something bigger, and they begin to think maybe while the city burned, and that was an accident, and everyone knows that, even though they're going to hang some for it. I mean, the people in court definitely, and the king definitely felt it was an accident. Maybe there was some devilry in the fact that St. Paul's burned. And then they have to ask the next question, which is, did that devilry lead to murder? And that set of questions ties back into the modern, because the person who is killing people in the modern era seems to be obsessed with two different architects, Christopher Wren, who he appears to vehemently hate, and Nicholas Hawksmoor, who is an architect that most people haven't heard of, who actually was trained under Wren. And there's actually a fairly fierce amount of people in Britain who rehabilitated Hawksmoor. I mean, you can't make that stuff up. They were very upset that he had been overlooked. So I have both of those going on, and someone asked me the other day, they said, wow, you must have to do a whole bunch of plotting to make that work out. I said, here's the terrible truth. I'm a bit of a pantser. So I know who's going to die in the beginning, and I know what the solution is. And in the middle, I'm solving the crime with my team. So this plays out sometimes like it's playing out with, I'm writing one now, and I came to dinner one night, and my husband said, how was your day? And I said, I need a break in this case. I have 3 dead bodies in 3 weeks. If I don't get a break pretty soon, I don't. And so he's like, wait, you're not actually solving any murders, and you've actually killed those people.
That's your fault.
That's right, that's your fault. Maybe you should have thought before you killed them how this was going to work out. The good news is if I revise and one of them is superfluous, I can take them out, right? So, but
don't. I've actually read these pages.
So don't take them out. So, so that actually is kind of an exciting part of it, and I'm sure for you too, that there's an exciting part of kind of finding what's going
And
on.
I didn't really even know how it was going to happen either, because
Right.
who knows what I did with her? She's in the historical part, she sort of disappears, which is part of the mystery. And so then when I was doing the modern part, I was like, well, I have to figure out actually where she went.
Well, right. Well, and I'm going to ask you the obvious question, because you said, and I get this, that Nancy is, she can be catty and she can be, but if you had a chance and you had a time machine, would you hang out with her? And why or why not?
I think I would just because she was very witty and clever and funny, and I would like to sort of just see how her brain works and see, well, first of all, if I got it right, but also just to sort of like pick her brain about different things. She knew basically everybody.
What would you do? Would you go to a club with her? Because we've seen her in clubs, whatever. Would you go to a bookstore?
I think I would just go to tea.
Tea?
I would go to tea because I'd want to be able to hear what she was saying. And also because I really, really love like British tea, like the scones and like oh, well,
I've
small
plotted
tea.
cream in my
Yes.
fridge right now.
Jealous.
You're welcome to some of that.
I would really just think that was a lot of fun. Maybe mimosas too.
Yeah, see, they can have mimosas in it, I
No, but I would
See,
find a
this is
place.
why
I
when
would
you-
find a place.
When you
for
don't
mimosas.
write straight historical fiction anymore, I don't have to worry about that, because in the modern timeline, we can have mimosas.
Right. That's true. I could do both.
Yeah, that's
We
very
could.
good.
I could be like, we'll have your tea, and then I'll take you to mimosas. You see how this world works.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Shoot, I don't think we're gonna have that chance, so I think I would hang out with Nigella before I would hang out with, well, there's two reasons. I really love Lady Margaret, but the last place I would go if I had a time machine is London, immediately before, during, and after the Great Fire.
Yeah.
It's apocalyptical in a way that I don't even think we can imagine. A third of the city burned, over 13,000 houses, 100,000 people were left homeless, and we're constantly given this nonsense that was at the time that only 8 or 10 people died. But we know that's not right, and historians know that's not right now because it got so hot. I was just looking at this today. There were fire tornadoes like there were in the firebombing of Dresden. And in the core of the fire, it exceeded 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside some of the houses, it likely based on what they're built of and what probably frequently exceeded 1,000 degrees.
Yeah.
So there were, and these are rabbit-worn streets, so there's no way everybody got out, but they would have been completely consumed in that kind of heat. So I don't want to go back there, not because I don't want to hang with Margaret, but because I really can't think of a worse time.
Yeah.
And London, Restoration London, even before it burned, is like a cesspool. There's rats and it smells, and it's really, it needs a whole overhaul, and it's about to be wiped clean.
Yeah.
And everyone's worried about this because it's the year 1666, and 666
No.
is the number of the devil,
Yeah. Don't
right? So they're like, everyone is expecting something terrible to happen. So I think I would hang with Nigella. And Nigella loves to go to art shows, so I would go to an art exhibit, and then she likes to have a nice dinner, and she's really good at picking wine.
Oh yeah, that would
She's
be great.
really good at picking wine, so
She
I think
is.
that's what I do.
Yeah, I always get thirsty for wine when I read your books.
Yeah.
I have to also add like a little change to mine because you mentioned like the Great Fire and how that wouldn't be good. I wouldn't visit Nancy during the Blitz of London when the Germans are bombing.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't do that. It would be like the 1920s when they're like partying around.
When we first meet her, that's why I asked about the
Yeah.
club,
I
because
would do
I
that.
would go to the club.
Yeah, I would do
So
that.
if you invite me, we're going to the
Okay,
club.
let's do that.
So I think that's. Do you feel like you have anything that we all put something? I mean, I already mentioned the fear of fire. We all put something of ourselves into our characters, or we see something we connect with. For you, what is that thing with Nancy?
Oh, I think so many things, honestly. You know, interpersonal relationships with family. I had some experience with that. I have many siblings. I love all of my siblings, and I've never tortured any of them. At least, I don't think I've tortured them. I'm the oldest. They probably think I tortured them a lot. So I think a lot of that. But then, obviously, like the love of reading. I mean, she's obsessed with reading, obsessed with writing. Being able to explore her journey and like the pitfalls of that. You know, she had her first book published in 1933, I think, and she didn't hit it big till 1947. And all that time, she's struggling to make it as a writer. And I think you and I both know it. It's sort of always like an up and down thing. And you know, you think this one's gonna be it, and then you're like, oh, it's not it. What's the next thing? So that was really something I got to explore with her. And
Well,
then,
she seemed to write because she was compelled to write.
Right.
She was never going to stop writing.
Right.
And I think that's something definitely I think could be
Yeah.
said about you. It's definitely,
and you.
yeah, I had a friend years ago say, well, this is before I had an agent, and this is a bit of a pessimistic friend, and he said, so what are you going to do if this book doesn't sell? I said, I'm going to write another one. And he said, what are you going to do if that book doesn't sell? And I said, let me just go to the bottom line here.
It's
I'm
never
going to
ending.
continue writing books until I get tired of doing it.
Yeah.
Irrespective of whether they sell or not. I'm just like, okay, because I thought we could do this for an hour.
Forever.
Right. So,
Yeah, my husband's always like, oh, when we retire. And I'm like, when you retire.
right.
I'm gonna write until I die. I think, like, I don't think I could stop because even like we've talked about this before. Even when we're not writing, we're in like the car thinking about like writing it in our heads, and you know before you go to bed at night, you're like, oh, I'm writing in my head right now. I guess we're not sleeping. So
Yeah, who hasn't pulled over
yes,
and written something on a Starbucks napkin?
Yep.
You know, that's the only thing you can find in your car. And you're like, God, I hope I'll be able to read this later.
Yes.
So,
Or like you hit the little volume thing on your notes in your app on your phone, and you're like, okay, so this is what's gonna happen, and then you just like.
I'm so old. I used to have a dictaphone.
I remember you telling me
It was a
that.
voice-activated dictaphone, and I always had it in my
Yes.
car for just that reason. Because the car and the shower are the two places that you're going to get
Yeah.
ideas, because it's the least possible to write them down there.
So you've switched genres now, and we know that with this book, you're gonna get some your historical fiction fans, for Sophie Carano fans, are gonna still get a taste of history in here. What's the funnest thing that you like learned while you were writing this book?
Well, I learned some, obviously, like terrifying things, like about the Great Fire,
The rats.
who are the rats, right? I learned something actually that I want you to know ahead of time. None of my characters use this product, because otherwise you won't want to read my book. But I learned about the worst beauty product in the history of the world ever. I swear
my
to God,
gosh.
okay? Puppy water.
Ew. What is
So
that?
women were putting puppy water on their faces for
What's
their
that?
complexions.
Their potty?
You're gonna wish it was when I tell you what it really was.
Oh,
Because what it was dead baby puppies.
No.
Soaked in oil with other
Oh.
ingredients
Oh,
and then
God.
strained, and then you put it on your face.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, I've written in the 1200s.
Yeah.
Okay, right. I've written on Crusade.
Yeah.
I've written, and I thought, God, I don't think I'd want to live in Restoration
No.
England.
No.
I don't think I would.
That's horrible.
Yeah, so that was kind of a shocker. But I also think this is a kind of a fun period of history, to fire aside, because we are seeing the beginning of the Enlightenment and the idea that science and God are not separate. That science is to be embraced because isn't it wonderful that God gave us these ways? And one of the things my team, Margaret and Etienne, are trying to build a telescope. She's seen a convex lens, which is the newest type of telescope, and you know the idea that being able to see God's creations in the heavens is also inspired. We're not seeing the breach that will come later in life between religion and science. We're seeing this wonderful sort of, so that's very exciting. All these crazy, wonderful ideas. Although doing the forensics then was a little different than doing them now, because now I had to really, in fact, if anybody ever looks at crime reads online, I have an interview this week with a forensic biologist who, besides teaching forensic biology and being on call with the police, she stood over her first human remains as a sophomore in college, also consulted on bones and CSI. And I had her look at my book because I really didn't want to screw anything up on a level where I got, the single-spaced letters that we get from readers when they think you've screwed something up. And so I had to really learn that, and I had to put up with a lot of frustrations, like CCTV cameras are everywhere in London, so how am I going to put things where it isn't on film? The forensics in the past, it was really more acting things out, and me falling over on the floor numerous times to see if we're pushed from different directions. If you were to be struck with a pry bar, what is the likely way you're going to fall, right? I'm sure the dog.
Hey,
she's having
can you hit me
fits.
from behind with a bar?
Right. So I think that learning that was actually liberating in a way, because the more science there is now, the more exacting you have to be. So watching two women with a similar interest pursue it in two time periods when the tools were different and the expectations were different, and they have some similarities in personalities, and they face totally different hurdles. That was kind of exciting.
I thought that was pretty fascinating too.
Yeah. Should we see if anybody has any questions before we talk?
Sure, but should we tell everybody about the book that we did together first?
Yes, we should. We've done more than one book together. 2 books together. So back in 2014, we had a crazy idea. In some other genres, and actually romance is where it started, instead of writing collections of short stories, people were writing what were called continuities, which was a continuous story that read like a novel written by multiple people. We had this crazy idea that we could do this in historical fiction. And we went to another author's house and we spent a day plotting. We actually had a British writer on that, so we weren't even all on the same time zone. And we wrote what was the first, and it was a novelist from the Historical Novel Society magazine and such, the first continuity in the genre, called, ironically enough, this is And by Fire, and it was called A Day of Fire. It was the last minutes, hours, and days to the destruction of Pompeii. And then more recently, you have to tell about how there were multiple books in between, but we didn't work together on a book again until the last one.
Yes, in 2019, our book, Ribbons of Scarlet, released. It's about the French Revolution. Same sort of thing with the continuity where we take multiple points of view and we each wrote the multiple points of view, and it was a really, really fun project to do together.
Well,
especially
Eliza's an
when it came out.
overachiever, so she wrote 2
I
points of
wrote
view.
two.
2. You know,
Yeah.
we wouldn't trust anybody else to do that, but you got to write 2. And I wrote The Only Royalist, and that was funny because on tour, I think a lot of people thought I was a monarchist. And I'm obviously not a monarchist, right? I felt like this is all about, well, it was about showing the power of women and whatever their passions were. And my royalist passion, her passion was her family, and she tried to save her brother, the king, and also she really did believe in the divine right of kings. And she read Edmund Burke, but she just wasn't buying it. So I think we were trying to show both perspectives, but because I was the only royalist, I kept thinking that I was going to show up at an event and be run out of town
Yes.
or rail or something.
Well, and my characters definitely would have run you out of town. I wrote a rebel and an assassin. Well, maybe Charlotte wouldn't have. Charlotte
No.
might have just
Charlotte killed Murray in his bath.
yeah,
She's that Charlotte.
like he incited a lot of rebellions, and she was like, yeah, we need to go.
We called her our convent-trained assassin.
Yes.
Because she did grow up in a convent. So we could totally talk all day about
Oh,
this
yeah.
because we go to lunch, we do talk all day about
Yes.
this. But
We have to set a timer.
Yeah, but we should probably see, does anybody have any questions for either of us or both of us before we exhaust you? Dead silence. Dead silence.
Any questions?
Right.
I'm
Well,
just
so
happy.
these
Go ahead.
Well, these were both new eras for you both, right? And so did that involve a lot of big learning curve with just background research on?
We were just
setting?
talking about that yesterday.
Yeah, it did, but I'll tell you the other thing. I was on a panel at Malice Domestic in April, and someone said, it was on police procedurals, and someone said, as the research hard, I said, well, I wrote historical fiction for a decade. Nothing makes you a better researcher than writing historical fiction. I mean, so we already have our chops, so it's just the excitement.
I think the hardest
Something
thing for me, I wrote this before, I started writing it before the pandemic hit and everything shut down. And I had plans when I had sold the book to actually go to London, be in the bookshop. The bookshop has an apartment above you can rent. I planned to rent that out. I was going to live the story. I was going to visit Chatsworth House, which is this big estate where the family lived. And obviously none of that worked. And then I was like, oh, well, I can visit Ohio State University, where my daughter goes and works in the rare book room, because they have a Mitford collection there. And I can read the letters and articles and diaries. And then they shut down because obviously everything shut down. So, but fortunately, there is, like I said, all these letters written in published. Nancy, at one point, while she was editing some letters for family that were going to be published, said to her sisters and her friends, let's save all of our letters. Someone might want to read them one day. And everyone was very skeptical about that, but I'm grateful they listened, because that was how I did a majority of my research, was actually just reading everything that they had written. So that was the hardest part.
Well, I do think the one thing you're right, what we talked about yesterday though, and this is a fair point, is you have people in historical, and I made it hard for myself because of 2 timelines, and I'm working on the second book, and the modern team will be the same. But what I wasn't thinking when I started this is every book I'm going to have a historical timeline. And it doesn't have to be in London, but I'm still going to have one. So we are part of, there are people in our genre who always, they write Tudor, then they write Tudor, and there's nothing wrong with that. They write Tudor brilliantly. But neither of us are driven that way. We tend to be more muse-driven.
Mhm.
So we already were used to kind of throwing ourselves the curveball of saying, okay, you were in 1250, but now you're going to be in, 1562. How do you like that? So,
Yeah.
that helps.
One day we're getting burned in ancient Pompeii, and then we're cutting off heads, and
That's right.
and then we're in World War II. And
So many of our characters died.
yes, actually, one of our friends made a coffee cup for me that said "Everyone dies," because literally, every one of my books up to that point, there had been a horrific death, and I was thinking, that's kind of sad.
Yeah. So you should write crime.
I
You can put that to good use.
I actually am really thinking about that.
And did you have one?
No, I was just saying I'm very familiar with Eliza. Read all of her books and
Thank
met her
you.
before, but I have not read anything of yours. But I'm looking forward to reading
Well, you'll have
your
to
book.
try it.
I
And you can
definitely
always
will.
send me. You can always send me what you think. But
Oh,
I will read it.
I write reviews, so
And, well, I will
there
read
it
it.
is.
Just, if you're gonna send me a single-spaced letter of mistakes, don't do
I
it in red.
will not.
It's really hard to read the red, right? So,
I will not, but I will write. I post reviews, so I will post reviews.
so that's,
And but yeah, so it's fun to be back out.
Yes,
You know.
It is.
it really is.
it is, and I mean, that's somebody asked me, because it's only been basically a week. Yeah, was it a week yesterday? Week
Yes.
today.
Week today.
Oh Lord, it's a
Happy
week
1
today.
week
since I-
anniversary.
But see, the first day I didn't even eat. I just had a reheated 2-day-old Starbucks sandwich. I've lost all track of times. But somebody said, "How is it to go out and meet readers?" And I wasn't even thinking of it in the pandemic sense. And I said, "It's fantastic because you create the characters, but they don't end with you. They live in the minds and the hearts and the houses of other people.
Yeah.
And readers have this way of making you feel seen, making your characters feel seen, making you feel valued, making your words feel valued, and weirdly, without sounding too creepy, making you feel loved.
Yes.
And so that's really the payoff for what is a very solitary
Yeah.
line of work. I mean, I'm constantly messaging
Yeah,
Eliza
we
to
talk
say,
almost every day.
yeah, saying, "Oh, what's your word count today? Oh, I'm stuck in a parking garage with another dead body." But getting out and seeing readers or hearing from readers is just really the highlight of it, I think.
Yeah.
And then we have to go back in the cave.
Are you going to write any more about Nigella, since you seem to really like her?
That is my goal, yes.
Okay.
And I let's hope I am, because I'm about halfway through my first draft of the next book. So
It's really, really
But I
good.
definitely, but the history is not going to be the London. It's Southern London, Southern Modern. The history's not even going to be in England. It's going to be, so I'm really reaching outside my comfort zone. And now we'll see if I can tie it in.
Okay.
We'll
So it's
see.
going to be a series.
I'm really hoping so, yes.
Oh, nice.
But in order for it to be a series, and I'm going to say the most naked, shilling thing you can humanly say, I need people to buy my book.
Oh yeah, for
On
sure.
YouTube. It's very necessary for you to buy the book if you want the series.
For sure.
That was good.
I love discovering new authors. So that's awesome.
Any other questions?
What are you working on next?
So, yes. So let's start the list. So while I was reading or doing research for this book, I was reading one of Nancy's letters, and she was talking about this girl she had had lunch with named Deli, and that she said something really, really vulgar. She repeated in the letter, and she thought it was hilarious. And I was like, "Who is this Deli? I've never seen her in any of the hundreds of letters and anything I've read." Another mystery that I solved, because there was a little note at the bottom that said, "Star, Adele was Adele Astaire, sister of Fred Astaire." And I was like, "Wait, what?" So then I started diving down that rabbit hole and found out that Adele Astaire was even more famous than her brother in the 20s, and then ended up quitting dance to marry a lord, son of a duke actually, who happened to be the uncle-in-law to one of Nancy's sisters. So it was like all very tied in. So my next book, I don't know what the title is. Right now it's American Star. It was The Other Astaire. So who knows what it's going to actually end up being, but it comes out in a year. And that's that one. And then,
And I got a sneak peek at that.
Yeah.
It's really good. So you're going to want that one for sure.
and then I have two other ones. One that I'm working on actually right now writing. And it's about Queen Elizabeth when she was young and her dog, who was the first corgi that she was given as her own personal corgi. They had corgis as a family, and that dog ended up being like the matriarch to 17 generations of Windsor corgis, and was like her bestie. She snuck her in the carriage for her honeymoon and surprised Prince Philip with that, which
Well, that's a surprise.
was a surprise. He's like, "Okay, I guess the dog's coming on our honeymoon. Great." So I somehow managed to convince my editor to allow me to do some of the book in the dog's point of view. So there's that.
And I haven't got to read that, but I literally can't wait. I
Okay.
was cheering when you got the go
Yeah.
ahead for that.
I'm
I'm like, I'm going to read the corgi point of view.
Right. And then I'm doing a joint project with my friend Denny S. Bryce. I actually see her book on the In the Face of the Sun.
Oh, yeah.
We're writing a book called They Were Friends, and it's about the friendship of Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe.
Huh.
That's the end for right now.
That's all?
What's amazing, honestly, what's amazing about this is I'm tired just listening. Oh my God, I need like more ambition.
I always get a little bit embarrassed when everyone says, like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, "Oh,
Well,
800, yeah.
right. That's hysterical. So,
I know some people probably want to chat with you.
yeah, that'd be
Maybe
great.
get some books signed by you.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
We've got Sharpies, the ultimate tool for signing books.
We have one. Do you have an extra Sharpie?
I've got Sharpies.
Of course, we got plenty of Sharpies.
I'll share my
They have
Sharpies
some right
with
at
you.
the counter.
So,
But you guys are like a you should take this on the road. Are you
We
taking it
have
on
done
the
we
road?
have done that, and this is how we probably got so
Yeah,
close.
yeah.
We spent so much time
Yep.
together on the Ribbons tour,
Like
sharing
6 weeks,
rooms,
6
eating
weeks,
dinner.
Yeah.
The
Driving hours in the car
driving in the
together.
rental car, right?
We went all over. We were all the way up in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
down to Florida, just for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It was fun.
You really get to know somebody, and then you really get to like somebody.
Yeah.
If we get to spend 6
Driving
weeks
with them.
Yes.
So.
Sitting in the car for hours. And
And-
I like her music. She was like, you probably won't like my music. And I was like, well, let's give it a shot. And she put on the playlist, and I was like, oh, I
And she
like
was
your
super
music.
patient giving you directions, because I'm directionally impaired, so you need to point.
Yeah, you
Don't
definitely.
tell me
yeah.
east or
She
west, don't tell me
definitely-
left or
I was
right.
like this.
Yeah, and now we're gonna go here, like an air traffic
Yeah,
controller.
yeah, that's funny.
So, yeah.
We enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And she's really good at picking out restaurants and wine, just like Nigella.
Like I put a lot of wines I like in for Nigella. I secretly think, and I will say that one last funny thing, which is also Nigella and I wear this. In fact, I'm wearing one now, and I'm sniffing myself on camera. Nigella and I wear a couple of perfumes together, and ironically enough, which somebody said to me psychologically, that's kind of disturbing, right? Because you gave Nigella your fear of fire, and as O'Leary notices out loud in the next book, Nigella wears perfumes that have smoke notes in them.
Ooh.
And I never realized I did that.
Until he pointed it out.
There we go. And I'm like, you're not even a live person, but you just caught on to something.
And then you were
that's
like,
a little,
oh my god, I do.
yeah, I did. Yeah, so that's kind of weird.
So your characters surprise you.
Ah.
Oh yes. They don't cooperate at all a lot of the time. And you're like, and that's one thing that working together taught us.
Yeah.
Because when we do the group novels, if we have dialogue, when you do dialogue on your own, you're writing both sides.
Right.
So even if they don't cooperate, you're not overly surprised. When we write dialogue in a group book and two of our characters in the room together, we a lot of times write it live
Yeah.
on a Google Doc. And so I will
It's like
confidently
real
have my
life.
character say something, and I think we're going to get answer A, and we get answer Z. My
Yeah.
character's like,
You're like, wait, that wasn't in my plot for the day. Oh wait, you don't plot.
no, I'm sorry, I don't think that, I don't. But that's what happens in real life. I mean, if I'm talking to you or to someone in the audience, I don't know what you're going to say, so why should I always know in fiction?
That made it really fun. I really like that part.
That was the best part. That, and if we were supposed to all go, we never did. We were supposed to all go to Versailles
I know.
together, and then we were supposed to all go to, we're going to go to the Roman festival sometime.
Yes, that would be really
Because our British counterpart, Ben Kane, was on that book, still writes Ancient Rome in Britain, and he goes to a couple of festivals.
Yeah, he
over there
dresses up.
and dresses up, so we
Wow.
gotta do that.
I'm sorry, the dancing at Versailles that you have in your biography.
Oh, traipsing. The whole
Traipsing.
thing.
Okay, all right.
That was like a really literary way of just saying like I visited a lot.
Okay.
So when I was growing up, my grandparents lived in Paris. So they would fly us over during the summers, and one of my favorite places to visit was Versailles. And I saw it for the first time when I was 8. It was just sort of like mesmerized by this opulence. I'd grown up in DC area, so I was born in DC and grew up in Maryland. So like we were in DC all the time, so I'd seen beautiful buildings and lots of history. My parents are history nerds, but there's something completely different about Versailles, like with the marble columns and everything's gold and
Yeah, or even the Loire Valley.
yes.
First time I saw the Loire Valley, I was like, well, I've probably been, there's hundreds of chateaus there, and I've probably been
You're
to.
like I'm dead now.
Right. So, but it's useful because you can remember stuff for later, or you can always deputize. I have a bad habit of sometimes deputizing kids. One of my kids was studying in Rome, and I've got a manuscript that I'm going to work on when we're done with World War II and we move back to periods that are older. And she was in Rome, and I'd been to a location, and I'd forgotten to take down. I always try to take down an architectural detail or two that are very striking. If you go there, you'd still notice. And I said, I need you to go to this room and find anything. Find a door, find an archway, find something, because your mother failed. You need to find something that is just really striking that will catch somebody's eye in that room. And she did do that and sent me the notes back and some pictures, and that was useful.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it almost made worth the paying for that study abroad, didn't it?
Oh.
Yes, when we were working on Pompeii, my husband actually was in Pompeii. Well, he was in Naples for work, so he took a day trip to
Yeah.
Pompeii and was taking pictures and sending notes back. And we actually were kind of like at the I don't know if you'd already been to Pompeii when we were writing.
No,
it,
I
but
hadn't.
so we were like talking about how they have a lot of vulgar paintings and sculptures there, like everywhere. And he was like, "It's real. Look at this like horse post. It's a penis." I was like, "Oh my god, it is."
I guess that's like a historical version of sending you a dick pic. Look, it's so horse but it's really a penis. Oh my god, now that's on film too. This is gonna be a big
No,
problem
this
for me.
is like we don't even have wine here. This is like us chatting when we're just hanging out.
We'll have
would
wine
be
next
sick.
time. It'll be even better.
What the Romans ever do for us.
That's right, I love that scene. Other than the aqueducts.
Oh,
Thank
no.
you guys so much for coming out and
Yes, thank
spending
you.
the
Thank
time
you.
with us.
You were awesome.
So when crossing over into crime fiction and you've got a psycho character, well, I don't know if he's an actual, I guess you probably don't have